slated to increase from 9.5% to 10% next July, and Labor is adamant it should go ahead. Some coalition MPs have been pushing for it to be deferred, and Mr Frydenberg says the government will make a decision closer to mid-next year.
The guarantee is legislated from 9.5% to 12%. What the Prime Minister, myself, Jane and our other colleagues have said is that we will consider this report, we will consider other views that have been placed out there, and we'll make a decision about that in light of current circumstances before that scheduled increase takes place.
Professor Robert Brunig is the Director of the Tax and Transfer Policy Institute at the ANU, and he joins me now from Canberra. Good afternoon and welcome to you.
Good afternoon, Kirsten. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, thank you. Does this report provide the justification for the federal government to stop next year's increase to the compulsory superannuation rate?
I think that it does. There's a growing body of evidence. The Tax and Transfer Policy Institute has contributed to this body of evidence that what happens when we ask companies to pay more superannuation to workers is that workers end up with less wages. And this kind of makes sense because companies have a fixed amount of money they can give to people, and if the government says to them, you have to give it in this way instead of that way, then they'll give it in superannuation and not in wages.
You say it makes sense, but is there any evidence that points to employers being ready to deliver a wage rise to workers if they're not obligated to increase their superannuation payments next year?
I think there is evidence that once we get out of the pandemic, you would expect that there would be additional investment, there would be additional productivity increases, and those are the things that generate wage rises. Generally in the past, when we've had superannuation rises, they've been during periods of robust wage growth. And so even though they might be slowing down wage growth, we don't kind of feel it as much.
And yet we still may be in the pandemic next year. There is hope for a vaccine, of course, but we really just don't know how long this period will last.
And I guess that's the reason why you might think about deferring it. Given that there's so much uncertainty, given that we are worried about wage growth, we can defer it. And I think it shouldn't, I hope it wouldn't get too political, because the Australian superannuation system is a good one. Other countries would like to copy our system. It does a good job of getting people to save for retirement. And so I think saying maybe we should just wait to raise the guarantee is not necessarily an attack on the system. And sometimes people are taking it that way, and that's unfortunate.
Has modelling been done on what kind of economic activity would result if the increase is deferred?
I don't think we have precise numbers, but what we could expect is that if we did put it in place, and if it's an increase of 0.5, you might expect about a 0.4% lower wage increase for people. And people do talk about the fact that wages haven't been increasing quickly. Some people say wages haven't been increasing at all, but that's actually not true. We have had small wage increases. And if we brought in increases to the superannuation guarantee, we might be cutting those increases that we have had in about half.
This report looked at retirement incomes more broadly. It also suggests that Australians in the future should draw down on overall super balances and access equity in the family home. In your view, is it sensible for retirees to take a loan against their home which they may never repay?
So I'm actually personally not a big fan of that. I think we have a retirement system so that people put their money in superannuation, and they should use that when they retire. What we saw in the past 6 months is when we allowed people to voluntarily withdraw money from superannuation, that many more people took advantage of that than we thought would. And I think there's at least anecdotal evidence that people were kind of using it as a tax planning device. So I pull $10,000 out of super, I get it tax-free, then I stick another $10,000 in super, and I get the tax concession for that. So super's there for retirement. It should be going in, it should be staying there until people retire.
Can you see government incentives in the future encouraging retirees to do just that? And if yes, for what overall benefit?
I'm not entirely. I think the government could incentivize that in various ways, but again, I think that if you're worried about questions like housing affordability, there are other better policies than letting people pull money out of superannuation.
Is there a danger in playing with the settings of superannuation too much?
I think there is, in the sense that we're asking people to put aside money that they're not going to be able to touch for 30 or 40 years. In order to do that, I at least would like a bit of sense of security that the rules aren't going to change halfway through. Having said that, I don't think we really know what the right level of superannuation guarantee is. In many ways, what we're doing is we're asking people to take some of the money they have now, put it aside for their retirement. What that means is that our children and our grandchildren will have to pay less taxes to keep us in retirement. So in many ways, it's a good thing for future generations if we have a higher super guarantee. But I think it's a question of debate as to whether the right number is 9.5 or 10 or 12.
Does the conversation we're having now take into account the overall economic benefit that the country gains from this increased pool of savings that Australians have in trust until they retire?
I'm actually not sure that that's the main benefit of superannuation. And the reason I say that is that Australia is an open economy. We actually, if we stopped saving, we would still have plenty of money for investment because other people would be willing to invest in Australia. If we were shut off from the rest of the world, then this would be an important argument, but I don't think that's going to happen. I really think the argument is about ensuring the retirement of people who are in Australia and of making sure that we don't leave our children with a heavy tax burden.
Now, earlier on, you said that you hope politics didn't get in the way of this. How do you take the politics out of this particular debate?
I guess all I would say is maybe people shouldn't stake out extreme positions, so that I think one should be able to say we should pause the increase in the superannuation guarantee and not be accused of trying to throw the system out the window, because I think those are two very different things. Those sound to me like two very different statements. And so sometimes we accuse the people who have opinions that are different than ours of very nefarious goals when probably it's not true.
Professor Robert Brunig from the Tax and Transfer Policy Institute at the ANU, thank you.
Thank you.
Lawyers for Donald Trump have laid out unverified examples of what they claim is massive voter fraud that's masked a landslide victory for the US president in this month's election. In an hour-long series of statements, Donald Trump's personal lawyer Rudy Giuliani and others from the Republican campaign read excerpts from affidavits they say will form the basis of legal cases in up to 4 states. Their untested claims include double and triple counting of votes, centrally organised corruption spanning several states, and even foreign interference involving companies that provided electronic voting services. Mr Giuliani says there's a credible pathway to victory for Mr Trump.
Materials I have here, there are at least 10 that come from citizens. We have 1,000 at least, and we're getting more every day. And there are other aspects of this fraud that, at this point, I really can't reveal. This is really enough. It's enough to overturn any election. It's disgraceful what happened.
The President-elect Joe Biden has condemned Donald Trump's efforts to illegitimise the election, saying Mr Trump's refusal to concede delivers a harmful message to the rest of the world.
He will go down in history as being one of the most irresponsible presidents in American history. It's just out of the, not even within the norm at all. There's questions whether it's even legal. But it's going to be interesting to see who shows up in this call to meet with the leadership. And this is going to, we've won Michigan. It's going to be certified. We're going to end up making clear that they are, making clear that we won. And, but it just, it's hard to fathom how this man thinks. And it's hard to fathom. I'm confident he knows he hasn't won and is not going to be able to win, and we're going to be sworn in on January 20th. And I just, you know, but far from me to question his motive. It's just outrageous what he's doing.
The US Secretary of State has become the first top American diplomat to visit a Jewish settlement in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, angering Palestinians. Mike Pompeo cleared the way for products in the region to be labelled as made in Israel and says funding for groups which boycott them would be cut. He He also visited the Golan Heights, captured by Israel from Syria in the 1967 war and later annexed in a move not recognised by the UN.
You can't stand here and stare out at what's across the border and deny the central thing that President Trump recognized that previous presidents had refused to do, that this is a part of Israel, and a central part of Israel.
Mr Pompeo's visit comes a year after the Trump administration announced it no longer considered the settlements to be contrary to international law, reversing decades of US policy. This year has been one of the most challenging and confusing in living memory for Australians and the world, but it's those seemingly endless curveballs that have provided perfect fodder for the country's political cartoonists. And today at the Museum of Australian Democracy at Old Parliament House in Canberra, the best of their creations have been unveiled in this year's Behind the Lines exhibition. Our reporter Rosie King went along.
A dog's breakfast certainly sums up 2020, and it's also the theme of this year's Behind the Lines exhibition, an exhibition that celebrates the best of the best in political cartoons. I'm joined by the curator of the exhibition, Holly Williams. Holly, you must have been spoilt for choice this year, but how did you pick your top 104?
Well, I think this year really shows that political cartooning has got a very long tradition, and it's still right up there in terms of satire and the ability to distill complex issues. This year, one of the big challenges was obviously these epic events that happened. We've got the bushfires, we've obviously got the arrival of the pandemic, Black Lives Matter protests that spread around the world, and obviously President Trump, who is the gift that keeps on giving as far as cartoonists are concerned. And really for me, it was about looking at opportunities to make people laugh. It's been quite a grim, quite unrelenting rolling series of chaos events, and so certainly we've looked at opportunities to bring out a bit of humour and give people another perspective on things.
Well, there's no doubt it's a must-see exhibition. There's plenty here to make you laugh, to make you think, and even possibly make you cry. It opens to the public tomorrow.
Taking a quick look now at the weather around the country for